Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on April 12th, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Now, before we get into this week's astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that the show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. And to remind you as well that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, again at karmicevolution.com or on most major podcast platforms. I remind everybody as well that I'm offering still my 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, a discounted rate for podcast listeners only. So if you want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose and what may be holding you back from achieving your highest destiny in this lifetime, then this reading is for you. So if you feel stuck, frustrated, or otherwise stymied in your relationships, your career, finances, your health, and you want to know why, then again, this reading is for you. And if you'd like to understand how, by letting your unconscious script, which is based on old soul-conditioned behaviors from the past, run the show, which basically all of us do, and now you want to become more conscious about how to change this up going forward, then this reading is for you. So if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, then this is the reading you definitely want to buy. As I like to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of my special discounted offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. So, and if you have any questions about the reading, by all means, feel free to email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com. Okay, so now let's get on to this week's astro news you can use. Let's first look back at the March 25th, 5-degree and 7-minute Libra full moon lunar eclipse and the April 8th, 19-degree, 24-minute Aries new moon solar eclipses. And note that I mentioned last week that eclipses are like jump starts to a car, or in other words, like electric jolts. And for that reason, earthquakes are frequently associated with eclipses. So it's no surprise to look back now and realize that between these two last eclipses, the world experienced several of them. So the first was on April 2nd, which I believe I mentioned last week, and that was just following the April 1st third quarter lunar square of the Capricorn moon to the Aries sun when, quote, a powerful magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck Taiwan, prompting Japan to issue a tsunami warning. And the quake was the strongest to strike Taiwan in 25 years, according to Taiwan's Central Weather Administration, and resulted eventually in 13 deaths and the stranding of several hundred people. Next, a powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck near the Mariana Islands just after 6 a.m. local time, which was 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, April 5th, according to the United States Geological Survey, which monitors earthquakes. Now, the Mariana Islands are in the western Pacific Ocean north of the equator, and according to the USGS, the quake was centered in the Maug Islands region near Saipan, the northernmost largest of the Mariana Island. I did not see any casualties listed to that earthquake, but I can't say that with certainty. But finally, on April 5th at 10:23 a.m., a 4.8 magnitude earthquake was detected about an epicenter, with an epicenter near Lebanon, New Jersey, that was felt from as far as Maryland to Massachusetts, which included in New York City, and that this was the highest recorded magnitude for this particular area, the Northeast, in 50 years, again, according to the USGS. So this quake was then followed by a 2.0 magnitude earthquake about 2 hours later, with an epicenter 7 kilometers west of Bedminster, New Jersey, and then again by 3 more aftershocks ranging from 1.8 to 2.2 magnitude, and those were reported near Morris, Hunterdon, and Somerset, New Jersey counties. And finally, a third earthquake registered at 4, which shook up portions of the Garden State, that's New Jersey, on April 5th, after an afternoon of unusual seismic activity. Now, less than a week after that original 4.8 magnitude earthquake rattled the tri-state, a 2.6 magnitude aftershock was felt Wednesday, April 10th, again in New Jersey. And according to the USGS, more than 40 aftershocks have occurred since Friday, April 5th, with the most being 2.0 magnitude or less. And again, according to the USGS, there's a 21% probability of a magnitude 3.0 or higher aftershock within the first month of this particular earthquake, and a 3% chance of a magnitude 4.0 or higher. So, interesting, right? So let me remind everyone that when we look back, we can note that what preceded this eclipse series, which was the March 10th Pisces new moon, which asked us to plant seeds of greater empathy, that while the March 25th Libra full moon lunar eclipse revealed to us that it was time to release old dreams that by then were proven unworkable because they were too fantastical to actually manifest in the physical world. In a weird kind of way, an eclipse, aside from the astronomical and physics explanations, the scientific explanations of earthquakes and how they may or may not be related to astronomical activities, right? We're looking at this through the lens of astrology, not necessarily astronomy. It's sort of like a wake-up call, right? That's what an eclipse is in general. It reveals things that have formerly been hidden or eclipsed. And there's something about the earth just literally saying to us, hey, wake up, right? Something's not exactly, even here. Something's not exactly status quo. Something might need to change. You might need to notice something, that kind of thing. However, it's when we hit this past week's October 8th, I don't know why I'm saying October. I was looking at the old, did I say October before? No, I didn't. I don't think so. Anyway, sorry about that. I'm going to talk more about last year's October eclipses, so I got confused. But it's when we hit this past week's April 8th Aries new moon solar eclipse that we, really understood that we were asked to plant seeds that can blossom into more realistically realizable goals. Now, I talked about this last week, but I just want to reemphasize it because it's Aries energy, and Aries is proactive. So we want to look at goals that will allow us to move forward proactively in the future because they contain more achievable logical foundations from which they can grow. So the clue to the fact that old plans must be either totally jettisoned or reviewed and updated to make them workable in the future is that Mercury is now retrograde in Aries until April 25th, again, as I mentioned last week. So this is echoed as well by transiting Pluto's current position in Aquarius, through which we can feel in that shift in the winds through the slow transition from slow, steady, cautious Saturn-ruled Capricorn archetypal energy into that of more progressive, humanitarian-oriented Aquarian archetypal energy as it begins to really take hold. And if Aquarius energy is about anything at all, it's about bringing in new perspectives that replace old ones that can lead to a change in ideas and or ideologies. Now, in alignment with some of these energies, on April 7th, the day before the April 8th solar eclipse, according to Reuters News, quote, the Israeli military has withdrawn more ground troops from the southern Gaza Strip, leaving just one brigade there 6 months after the start of its offensive, a spokesperson for the force said. And I noted that a military brigade totals between 3,000 and 5,000 soldiers. It said, meanwhile, Egypt is preparing to host a new round of talks aimed at reaching a ceasefire and hostage release deal, which both Israel and Hamas said they would attend. So also on April 7th, the New York Times reported, and again I quote, after 6 months, Israel's war with Hamas appears to have reached an impasse. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would not bend to international pressure and give in to extreme demands by Hamas, the Islamist movement that controls Gaza. It was initially unclear whether the withdrawal would delay a long-threatened incursion into the southern Gaza city of Rafah, which Netanyahu says is needed to eliminate Hamas. And that's the end of the quote from the Times, though I would say Netanyahu later stated that Israel will continue with its planned Rafah incursion, as they call it, according to MSNBC, also on April 7th. Now, this pause, this stated action but yet pause in the current action would seem to be more likely attributed to the fact that Venus is now in Mars, the war god, ruled Aries, since April 4th, and that she'll remain there until April 29th. But again, let's keep in mind that Mercury, the messenger god, is retrograde in Aries, also Mars-ruled, right? And during that time, he'll be there until he reaches 16 Aries on April 25th, which I mentioned last week. He stations at 27-something on April 1st. But he remains, so Venus is in the Mars-ruled sign of Aries saying, let's go, 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 go. She wants to do battle, but Mercury retrograde in Mars-ruled Aries wants to review the battle plans, to rest the troops, which is one of the things that Israel has stated, to ascertain their potential level of eventual success, because obviously you don't want to use your troops and not achieve your stated goal. So again, I'm not making any moral judgments here, I'm just calling it the way I see it astrologically. And further, since the April 1st Israeli attack on Syria that killed 7 Iranian top military leaders, Israel has been bracing for Iranian retaliation, which Iran has vowed is imminent. And I mentioned this last week too. So far, Iran is still rumbling, but has not yet taken action, if indeed it will, though I would place a pretty sure bet on some kind of retaliation. And the issue there is, will that result in further review by the U.S. and possibly other Western allies, depending, right, in terms of defending Israel, or perhaps if Iran decides to attack American troops in the West Bank or in Lebanon, etc. Now, on April 8th, also the day of the Aries new moon solar eclipse, Mercury met with the dwarf planet Eris at 2444 Aries, and again that was hard on the heels of the Israeli announcement that it was moving all but one brigade from southern Gaza. Now, Eris, known to the ancients as the goddess of chaos and discord, who also happens to be Mars' sister in Greek mythology. And for those who are unfamiliar, in Greek myth, Eris roamed, this is according to Homer, Eris roamed the battlefield along with her brother and brought increased pain and suffering to the wounded and dying. Now, while I know that many modern astrologers tend to see Eris as a feminist symbol, in my opinion, there's a bit more to her than that. And that's because when she was left off the invitation list for a festive feast that gathered together all of the gods, she was not invited, so she crashed the party and spitefully rolled a golden apple down the banquet table with a ribbon around it that said, "For the fairest of them all." And, then she watched them all fight over who's the fairest. So we may recognize that line, "For the fairest of them all," from more modern, although at this point still considered old, fairy tales. But its roots lie further in the past, as we can see. Now, evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest likens Eris to competition or the competitive drive. And I can see why some astrologers therefore also attribute to Eris a feminist attitude, as in, just because I'm female doesn't mean I can't compete too, so watch out. But the way she does it in myth is clearly both manipulative and filled with spiteful retribution, because again, according to Greek myth, Eris is the one who sparks the competition between Aphrodite, that's the Greek for the Roman Venus, Hera, the wife of Zeus, or the wife of Jupiter, and Athena, the goddess of justice, and thus she sparks the Trojan War. Now, the rest of the story is easy to Google, so I'm not going to take up time. I'll let you do your own research. But again, in my opinion, Eris has a lot to do with both war, or the theme of war, and the competition within relationships that sparks a kind of competition that then leads to an all-out war, right? And in this case, in the myth's case, it was, as I said, the Trojan War. So, in addition to Mercury having conjoined the dwarf planet Eris on April 8th, we have the Sun conjoining Eris also on April 13th. And I'll remind everyone now that it was on November 27th of 2023 that the transiting nodal axis Aries North Node conjoined with Eris, obviously in Aries. Before that, however, the energy of the transiting nodes approaching conjunction to Eris had, quote, been building since July 22nd or 23rd of 2023, which was when the nodes moved into the signs of Aries and Libra, but that from between August 28th to December 13th, again 2023, the north or ascending lunar node was within 1 degree they were within 1 degree of each other, the North Node and Eris, in Aries, according to a blog on LinkedIn by Eric Roth, a shamanic astrologer. And this was an uncommon example, he said, of a very slow-moving planet hanging out with one of the moon's nodes while it was also moving slowly. This means that Eris would play an important role in the upcoming eclipse season from last October in 2023. And Roth continued, adding that Eris and the North Node didn't have an exact conjunction until that November 27th, 2023 date, but that during both the October 18th solar eclipse this year, the October 14th solar eclipse at 21.8 degrees Libra and the October 28th lunar eclipse at 5 degrees 9 minutes of Taurus, that's from last fall, 2023, that Eris was only 8 minutes and 19 minutes away from the North Node, respectively. So in total, Eris came into orb of 1 degree of conjoining the North Node in Aries and opposing the Libra South Node between August 28th and December 13th of 2023. So what happened then? In case you're starting to wonder where I'm going with this, because it's getting confusing. Well, first of all, on August 1st, 2023, the day of the Aquarius full moon at 9 degrees and 16 minutes of Aquarius, As Mars in Virgo trined Jupiter in Taurus, and Mercury in Virgo opposed Saturn in Pisces, the DOJ Special Prosecutor Jack Smith unsealed and announced the indictment charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to construct an official obstruct. I'm sorry, I don't know what's the matter with my speech today. I think I can read, but I'm having trouble pronouncing. So, all right, bear with me. Need to do some vocal exercises. You know how the singers do, or I loosen my lips. Anyway, so let me go back here again so it makes sense to you. The indictment quotes it charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia and sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full, according to the United States Department of Justice's website. And on August 14th, 2023, a grand jury convened by District Attorney Fani Willis in Fulton County, Georgia, indicted former President Donald Trump and 18 of his allies on violations of 16 Georgia statutes. These charges include violations of Georgia's Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, according to the United States Democracy Center website. Now, we know that since then, a couple of these indictments were thrown out by Judge McAfee in Georgia, but the basic ones still stand. I think he threw out 3 of them, possibly 4, but they're minor. Also, we may recall the chaos in Congress after the House voted GOP Majority Leader California Rep. Kevin McCarthy out of his post as Speaker of the House on October 3rd. And that was after Florida Representative Matt Gaetz called for the vote on October 2nd, which happens to be the day that Mercury opposed Neptune in the sky. So all who follow U.S. politics in Washington will remember the chaos that followed over the next 3 weeks until Louisiana Representative Mike Johnson was elected Speaker on October 25th. So what's most interesting to me about this astrology is not only that this period of chaos occurred as the transiting North Node was approaching its exact conjunction to Eris in late November or November 27th, 2023, but it was doing so also between the October 14th Libra new moon solar eclipse that I mentioned before and the Taurus full moon lunar eclipse, and those were on October 14th and October 23rd of last year. So when we look back at those eclipses, and we know already that an eclipse's themes can begin to manifest in the collective at least 3 weeks or so prior to their exact culmination. Obviously, on October 7th, which was just the week before the October 14th eclipse, we had Hamas's terrorist attack in Israel and the taking of hostages, right? And immediately following Israel's retaliation as it mobilized 300,000 troops to invade Gaza with the stated purpose of defeating Hamas and recovering the then 250 hostages. Now, most recently, it was also on April 8th, 2024, as Mercury waxed into an exact conjunction to Eris at 2444 Aries, which I mentioned before, that we hit the 6th month mark of this war. Well, it was April 7th, but and we heard the announcement by Israel that I mentioned just before, that it was removing all but 1 brigade from Khan Yunis, the town in southern Gaza. So, and again, as I mentioned too, that, this doesn't mean that Israel has, it hasn't said that it would not invade Rafah. Okay. But anyway, we don't know if that's going to happen or not. So I refreshed my memory, and I want to do the same for you, about the definition of this eclipse season's theme, the one that just passed. via Bernadette Brady's excellent book, Predictive Astrology, and share it again with you now. The individual experiencing this series will find that, oh, you know what, this is not, this is the eclipse from October 2023. And I'm reading it because that was the refreshing of the memory part. The individual experiencing this series will find that huge obstacles will suddenly and easily clear, or on the negative side, a pending potential crisis will suddenly manifest and move through his or her life very rapidly. Either way, the individual will feel that everything is moving at great speed. And now I want to add to astrologer Ronnie Dreyer's eclipse-related teachings, which, as I mentioned during earlier podcasts, looks at when the transiting nodal axis hits the exact degree of any particular eclipse. So back on October 14, 2023, 11 days after Kevin McCarthy is voted out as Speaker on October 3rd, and during the chaotic next 3 weeks as the transitioning North Node approaches Aries, the transiting North Node was at 2452 Libra. Now, Ronnie Dreyer notes that it's important to recognize when the nodes hit an eclipse degree and whether that occurs before the actual eclipse or after. So in the case of October 14, 2023, the eclipse at 21 degrees and 8 minutes of Libra, because the transiting nodes, and I'm using the true nodes here because they're always retrograde, we're at 2452 Libra. This means that it wasn't until December 31st of 2023 that the transiting nodes regressed back to 21 degrees 8 minutes of Libra, thus culminating the major portion of this eclipse's energies. Now, that is on an individual level in terms of what I'm talking about. I'm using, one particular individual here. And what we know without dispute and without even looking at Kevin McCarthy's chart is that this particular set of eclipses hit him hard somewhere in his chart, right? And I'm not going to go back to his chart because we don't actually have his exact birth time. So, it'll miss things like whether the eclipse hit the cusp of a particular house. We can see some of the planetary things, but I don't know if I mentioned them here. I mean, I saw one or two, but they're not major. But anyway, so he was ousted as Speaker on October 3rd, which is clearly within the couple of weeks before the first October 14th eclipse last year in that series. And as this eclipse approached, it took an action that was made possible dating back to January 7th of 2023, which is when during the speakership election for the 118th Congress, McCarthy faced significant opposition within the Republican conference from the Freedom Caucus, who saw him as untrustworthy and insufficiently conservative. And after 15 rounds, and this is from Wikipedia, after 15 rounds of voting, McCarthy was elected Speaker, conceding to his opponents by allowing any representative to file a motion to vacate. So he's ousted 9 months later on October 3rd, and again, just a couple of weeks before, 2 weeks, 10 days, 11 days before the eclipse on October 14th. He loses his speakership. This is a huge deal to him, right? This is a very quick negative thing that's in line or in alignment with how Bernadette Brady described this particular Saros series set of eclipses. It's a loss of power. And instead of sucking it up and staying in Congress, he announces his resignation from Congress and that it will be at the end of the year on, you guessed it, December 31st. So there you go. You can't make this stuff up. Meanwhile, we know also that this eclipse likewise had a powerful effect on Mike Johnson's chart too, right? Only in his case, instead of it being a negative experience, it was positive, at least in terms of his assuming greater power than he had before. Now, the next eclipse in this series from last fall occurred on October 28th at 5 degrees 9 minutes of Taurus, and Johnson is voted in as the new GOP majority leader and Speaker of the House on October 25th, 2023. So the same theme applies here as noted, but this one is a positive, has a positive implications for him. But that eclipse's theme began to manifest somewhere around March 6th of 2023, which is quite a long time before, and that's because the transiting nodal axis was at that degree then, at the 5 degrees Taurus. So in this case, events in play last March led to the culmination of the eclipse at the actual time of the eclipse. You see how this works? Now, however, we have our current set of eclipses from March 25th and April 8th, 2024, manifesting under the theme I relayed to you all on last week's podcast, which is, according to Bernadette Brady, quote, inventiveness and flashes of genius are the hallmark of this Saros series. The individual will have intuitive leaps, insights, good ideas, visions, or vivid dreams. This newfound inspiration will pull the person away from his or her social life or relationships, thereby causing strain in the private life. This is a time when the person needs to be free. Now, freedom is in alignment with the fact that the April 8th eclipse, solar eclipse, is in Aries, right? Which is a much less restricted, more proactive energy that I say time and time again. It wants to move. But I think also it's interesting to note what she says about intuitive leaps and insights and good ideas, because some of that I think is related to Pluto in Aquarius, and also to replacing the old intuitive insights that didn't work out from the beginning of the March 10th Pisces new moon series. And, you know, that some of these from then and before obviously proved to be, as I said a couple of times, unworkable. You know, we couldn't easily manifest them in the real world. Okay, so I explained already that the March 25th eclipse was a Libra full moon lunar eclipse at 5 degrees and 7 minutes of Libra. And the more astute among you will note that this degree is actually quincunx, or 150 degrees from the 5 degree 9 minute Taurus lunar eclipse from October 28th of 2023, which began again circa March 6th of that year. So this is simply something to notice, because a quincunx generally represents the need to make an adjustment. And here both of these eclipses are in Venus-ruled signs, which definitely points to its major themes around relationships and partnerships and potentially money and finances. So if you want, go back and look at where these eclipse degrees occurred in your individual chart, because you may find these themes have risen in importance over this past year, and that some kind of adjustment has to or will be needed to be made. I know that's true for me when I look at my chart. But okay, let's go back again to the March 25th eclipse from this year, just, a few weeks ago, and note that the transiting nodes will not hit this degree until circa November 19th or 20th of this year. Now, I mentioned this several times last week and the week before, but we also know that November 19th, something I already mentioned in the past, is the same day that Pluto will re-enter Aquarius for the rest of his transit through that sign until he first dips his toe into Pisces, circa March 9th, 2043. That means the March 25th Libra lunar eclipse began to manifest its energy around 3 weeks or so prior to March 25th, but that it will not culminate fully until around November 19th or 20th, as stated. So those insights, visions, dreams, etc., may occur during this time period and potentially manifest between now and then. So what I'm trying to point out is that not everything is like bang right on the eclipse. It depends on where it falls in your chart. It depends on what happened before that led up to it, and it depends on how you decide to handle what happened before and leading up to it and going forward. Now, likewise, on March 30th of 2023, again close to 3 weeks before the April 20th, 2023 eclipse, which occurred at 29 degrees and 50 minutes of Aries, which, trined Donald Trump's natal ascendant, which is 2955 Leo, and his natal Mars, which is at 26 degrees and 46 minutes of Leo, that made it easy for him to appear in a different light to others, since the ascendant rules the first house, which is how others see us. And on March 30th, that was the day that Trump was indicted by the Manhattan grand jury for his alleged role in the scandal relating to hush money payments made to the pornographic film actress Stormy Daniels just before the 2016 U.S. presidential election, making him the first U.S. president in history to be indicted. So I mentioned that before, and I read I read you the Jack Smith thing, but this is what, on April 4th, 2023, according to its press release from the Manhattan DA's office, it said, and I quote, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin L. Bragg Jr. today announced the indictment of Donald J. Trump, 76, for falsifying New York business records in order to conceal damaging information and unlawful activity from American voters before and after the 2016 election. During the election, Trump and others employed a catch-and-kill scheme to identify, purchase, and bury negative information about him and boost his electoral prospects. Trump then went to great lengths to hide this conduct, causing dozens of false entries in business records to conceal criminal activity, including attempts to violate state and federal election laws. Trump is charged in a New York State Supreme Court indictment with 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. So, again, these charges occurred in the lead up to the April 20th solar eclipse at 2950 Aries and the May 5th lunar eclipse at 14 degrees and 58 minutes of Scorpio. And these eclipses fell under Bernadette Brady's description, which I do remember mentioning on this podcast at around that time, which is as follows, and I quote, This eclipse series is about being forceful and taking power. It has a manic flavor about it, with great force or strength manifesting in the relationship area. Individuals experiencing this Saros series may experience sudden events, like falling in or out of love, or sudden sexual encounters. The individual may also exert a huge effort in some group activity. End quote. So I would ask everyone now to think about how being indicted over trying to cover up a sexual relationship, and one that reportedly lasted all of one night, for example, Bernadette Brady's sudden sexual encounters, for the purpose of, quote, being forceful and taking power, as part of a, quote, huge effort in some group activity, say, by running to be elected president of the United States, and then, eventually declaring yourself immune from all charges, or simply, pardoning yourself if you get back into office, maybe. Meanwhile, according to the Associated Press, a jury verdict on May 9th, 2023, found Trump liable for sexually abusing and defaming E. Jean Carroll and ordered him to pay $5 million in damages. Trump appealed and made an unsuccessful counterclaim, end quote. This occurred 4 days after the exact May 5th lunar eclipse fell in his third house of communication and squared his natal 6th house, 13 degrees 6 minutes Ceres, and 12th house, 10 degree and 2 minute Pluto in Leo. A not very nourishing announcement that cost him money, right? Ceres, if you recall, has to do with sustenance. And in the 6th house, it would have to do with his work, So as part of what he's trying to do for work by running for president and assuming a new position, he basically, lied. Anyway, then on January 26, 2024, which was hard on the heels of the January 20th Sun-Pluto conjunction at 2959 Capricorn, and the Sun and Pluto's ingress into Aquarius that same day, A jury deliberated for 3 hours and awarded Carroll $7.3 million in emotional damages, $11 million in reputation-related damages, and $65 million in punitive damages, totaling $83.3 million. So, we know also that during this latest set of eclipses, or leading up to them, what I wrote is, oh, look, the March 25th, 2024 full moon lunar eclipse at 5 degrees 7 minutes of Libra, which remember is quincunxed by last year's October 28th, 5 degree 9 minute Taurus lunar eclipse. It triggered his natal second house 5 degree 5 minute, so 5 degree 7 minute eclipse fell within a degree of his 5 degree 50 minute Libra Neptune, which opposes his 8th house Aries, which is at 6 degrees and 41 minutes of Aries, and together that opposition forms a T-square to his natal 11th house Cancer Mercury at 8 degrees and 51 minutes of Cancer. And the April 8th 19 degree 24 minute Aries new moon solar eclipse fell next to Trump's 21 degree 9 minute Aries 9th house cusp. 9th house is the cusp of the house of law, conjunct his 21 degree 13 minute Aries in Hygeia being the goddess asteroid of health, and opposite his 17 degree 27 minute Libra Jupiter in his second house. And though considered wide for an eclipse, I'd say that this also triggered his Jupiter Chiron Juno, which spans from 14 degrees to that 1727 Libra to that stellium there, which depicts his karmic wound around justice and the ability to play fair, especially when it comes to money and finances, or other people's money and finances, which is one of the things that the second house to the 8th house axis represents. Now, again, back to this, current series of eclipses. On April 8th, the appeals court denies Trump's request to dismiss the hush money case in New York, which is really an election obstruction case, and also Jack Smith files a brief in the Supreme Court immunity case, which will now be heard by the court on April 25th. And on April 10th, Trump, which is the day of the culmination of the Mars-Saturn in Pisces conjunction, Trump loses his request to delay the hush money trial. And altogether, as Mars again was waxing towards Saturn and then conjoined to it April 10th, Trump lost 3 appeals in 3 different court cases. Now, I would say that fits the bill to prove that Mars-Saturn frictional energy can result in a great deal of frustration, wouldn't you? And on top of that, we learned on April 8th, according to the publication The Hill, and I'll quote from that article, more than a dozen retired 4-star generals, remember Aries eclipse, and generals, admirals, and other former military leaders filed an amicus brief within the Supreme Court arguing against former President Trump's claims of immunity in his criminal cases. And that is exactly what I just said, the hearing that the Supreme Court will have on April 25th. The group said that Trump's claims, quote, would threaten the military's role in American society, our nation's constitutional order, and our national security, and would have a profoundly negative effect on military service members. The group argued that granting Trump immunity against the criminal claims could open the door to future executive intervention in the country's elections and could put national security at risk. Quote, the notion of such immunity, both as a general matter and also specifically in the context of the potential negation of election results, threatens to jeopardize our nation's security and international leadership, the brief reads. Particularly in times like the present, when anti-democratic, authoritarian regimes are on the rise worldwide, such a threat is intolerable and dangerous, end quote. The group also wrote that if the court agrees with Trump's argument, it will destroy the relationship between the commander-in-chief and the military because the president would not have to follow law while the military still would. And also, I thought this from MSNBC was interesting, and that's about Trump's latest SPAC IPO, about which it said, and I quote, "In a sensible market, Trump media stock would sell for 50 cents, if that much." And it continues, value a shrinking $4 million business at $9 billion, valuing a shrinking $4 million business at $9 billion is one of the greatest feats of chutzpah ever in the U.S. stock market. Now, again, you can Google more about what this actually means, but he did introduce onto the stock market, the shares went up for sale, I believe it was March 26th, which is the day after the March 25th eclipse. And according to Newsweek, in an article dated April 11th, which was yesterday, it said that trading under the ticker DJT, shares of the company opened at about $70 a share when it went public on 26th of March, according to Google Finance data. The value of each share reached a high of $71.90 on March 27th before its profit and loss figures were released. But since then, the value has plummeted to less than half that amount, according to Google Finance data on April 11th, and each share is now worth $34.26. Now, Fortune magazine also likewise reported on April 11th that Donald Trump booted from prestigious list of billionaires after Truth Social's social parents swan dive, meaning that IPO, and from Newsweek again, they quoted Mary Trump. It says, writing on her Substack on Tuesday, which was April 9th, Trump's niece, Mary Trump, called the decline in the value of the shares the ultimate insult to the former president. Truth Social's parent company, Trump Media and Technology Group, which is TMTG, has been in a free fall since it went public, she wrote. It's so bad that yesterday's continued slide of the share's value erased all gains since the DJT stock began trading. It's at less than half the $79 opening price on its March 26 debut, plummeting his net worth, Mary Trump wrote. The drop has led investors to short sell the stock, the ultimate insult. So I want to pivot now and talk about the recent April 8th Aries new moon solar eclipse in terms of the pro-choice front and women's rights, because of course this particular eclipse, as I noted last week, was had sandwiched between the sun and the moon, or next to the sun and the moon at 19 Aries, wounded healer Chiron in Aries, and it also fell on the U.S. Sibley chart's birth chart, which is the birth chart that many astrologers use for the birth of America, on America's 20-degree Chiron in Aries. Now, it was reported that Arizona this week upholds their 160-year-old abortion ban. The state's highest court said the law, moribund for decades under Roe v. Wade, was now enforceable, but put the decision on hold for a lower court to hear other challenges to the law. Now, this comes at a time after Trump just announced this past week also that he would not favor a nationwide abortion ban and would rather leave it up to the states. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court did in their Dobbs decision, because they said that Roe versus Wade had been wrongly decided in terms of the law that it was predicated upon, and that in the absence of a federal law to replace the constitutional amendment, meaning Roe versus Wade, it could be left up to the individual states. Now, the deal is that what's interesting is that the Arizona Supreme Court allowed the old law to come into effect, which bans abortion at 6 weeks. but that it also granted Arizona voters the right to overturn their new ruling by which would ban nearly all abortions, right, 6 weeks, when they head to the polls this fall. So the deal is that in Arizona, in 30 days, the new law will go into effect that's resurrecting the old law, and that's a 6-week abortion ban. But they have enough signatures in Arizona to pass a referendum, which would be passed by the voters themselves, right? So, it's kind of interesting because the short term will be that abortion is effectively outlawed in the state, but after November 5th, it may well be that that is not the case and abortion becomes legal. I'm not exactly sure what the referendum has on it, how many weeks that abortion would be legal. So we can see that things, again, are starting to shift here a little bit, right? The old plans not going to work. They talked a lot about the Comstock Act when the Supreme Court recently heard the oral arguments about mifepristone, right? And that Justices Alito and Thomas, the two most conservative on the court, brought up the issue of the Comstock Act, which goes back to the 1860s and does not allow anything of a pornographic nature or anything that supports abortion to be put through the mail. And so, they're trying desperately to hang on to these archaic laws and rulings that without acknowledging that things have changed. But again, as we're entering the age of Aquarius, and in its infancy, and Pluto's, in Aquarius and going to be staying there for the next 19 years after late November, we very much are going to start seeing things change. Now, similar to Arizona, the Florida Supreme Court also okayed an abortion amendment for the 2024 ballot. And that was the headline on April 1st, which again was at that third quarter waning lunar square from last month's monthly lunar cycle. It said that the piece said, quote, State Supreme Court approved for the November ballot a referendum that would guarantee abortion rights, according to the U.S. News and World Report. This happened on the same day that the court allowed the new 6-week abortion restrictions to take effect. So if successful, the measure would undo the state's recent abortion bans, which the state Supreme Court upheld in a separate decision, and would make Florida the latest GOP-controlled state that's been roiled by reproductive rights in the wake of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade in 2022. Now, Florida currently bans abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy, but it was Governor Ron DeSantis who passed one of those middle-of-the-night bills that changed it to 6 weeks. And so the law upheld by the justices will prohibit abortions again at 6 weeks when it takes effect in 30 days. Now, on April 11th, as the Sun and Mercury conjoined in Aries, it was announced that O.J. Simpson passed away after a long battle with cancer. So I just wanted to mention that as one of the news pieces before I say goodbye. And took a quick look at his chart. He was born on July 9th of 1947 at 8:08 a.m. in San Francisco, California. And I note that the recent set of eclipses triggered his natal second house Libra Neptune opposite his 8th house Eris in Aries to form a T-square to his natal 11th house Cancer Venus. And that's very similar in a weird kind of way to Trump's chart. They're born fairly close together because that eclipse on March 25th at 5 degrees of Libra also conjoined Trump's natal second house Neptune at Libra and opposed his 8th house Eris and Aries. But in his case, those two opposing entities form a T-square to his natal 11th house Cancer Mercury. So with O.J. Simpson, it was his Venus that was squared. Now, the April 8th eclipse at 19 Aries fell in Simpson's 9th house, just like trumps fell at the end of his 8th house, very close to the 9th house cusp, and quincunxed his natal Jupiter on the IC at 17 degrees of Scorpio. And in terms of his passing, however, transiting Jupiter was on his Taurus midheaven and just past opposition to his natal Scorpio Jupiter, which I just mentioned was on his IC, which is the bottom of the chart, while transiting Pluto in Aquarius was in his 6th house of health, quincunx his progressed Hygeia in Cancer in his 11th house. Read, again, he died of cancer, a health issue, but also trine his 10th house Gemini North Node and sextile his 4th house Sagittarius South Node. Now, experienced astrologers know that even though Jupiter is known as the great benefic, the planet Jupiter is often prevalent in one's chart at their death. So I just want to mention that. So his was on his midheaven. Everybody is learning about it. He was a huge sports star, a football player, before he was also hugely recognized as someone who went on trial for his wife's murder and who was subsequently acquitted. So we're not going into the details of whether he should have been or not been, but his death is extremely noticeable. So Jupiter up there shows us that it's expanded the coverage because he had such a long-ranging reputation. Again, first as a renowned athlete and later as a potential murderer. So on April 15th now, next week, we'll experience the first quarter waxing monthly lunar square of the Cancer moon to the Aries sun, which may well challenge us to push through with continuing to review our future plans, Mercury retrograde, remember, so that we may manifest them this time around or manifest them successfully. And the Cancer moon's always about domestic stuff. The moon is always about your home. So this may well challenge us to get cracking on that spring cleaning advice that I mentioned from Ronnie Dreyer last week. And on the 19th, which is when I'll be back with you again, Mercury and Venus conjoin in Aries. The Sun will enter Taurus. Mars in Pisces will sextile Jupiter in Taurus. And Mars will also sextile Uranus. Because on April 20th, we have the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And on April 21st, Venus and Chiron conjoin in Aries, and the Sun and Pluto are sextile to each other. So I'm going to talk all about that with a particular focus on the much talked about Jupiter-Uranus conjunction next week. So if you will join me again on April 19th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. So thanks for joining me today. I hope you found this information helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. And till next week, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.